Welcome to The Game Changer with Dr. Sharalyn, where purpose meets performance and leaders are built to shift legacies. I'm Dr. Sharalyn Payne, executive strategist, speaker, and the secret weapon behind leaders who drive transformation at the highest levels. Each episode delivers bold truths, power skills, and real-world strategies to help you lead with precision, show up with presence, and build the kind of influence that outlasts trends. This is the space where high-impact decisions are born, where influence is intentional, and where the bold don't just lead, they change the game. So if you're ready to rise, ready to lead, and ready to create the kind of impact that moves markets, missions, and minds, you're in the right place. Welcome back to The Game Changer. Today, we're diving into a controversial but necessary conversation. What's wrong with using applied psychology in the workplace, and what leaders should be focusing on instead? My guest, Barry Wolfe, the mind behind Value-Centric Leadership. This isn't just theory. It's a model born from deep experience and research. And I promise you, some of today's insights will change you and challenge the very tools HR and leadership professionals rely on daily. So I can't wait to hear how I'm going to change from this conversation. Barry, welcome.
Thank you very much, Sharalyn. That's quite a buildup. It's nice to be here, but it's great to be with you and your audience. But gosh, it's nothing like setting the bar kind of high.
Well, you deserve it. You have a very rich background. I've had the opportunity to speak with you. I've loved every single minute. And
Likewise.
I just enjoy, thank you, having rich conversations, fresh perspectives with people who actually know what they're talking about. It's nothing like it.
Imagine that. Yeah.
Imagine that. So let's get right into it. I want to talk about what's wrong with using applied psychology in the workplace.
Well, my answer to that is based on having used things like personality tests, intelligence testing, working with competency models, and the experience really left me a skeptic, and it caused me to do a lot of research into what's the genesis of a lot of this stuff. Where did we get these things? And do they really actually work? Is it just me? And so that research and a lot of reflection on that, and just talking with other folks who have been using these, it has really surprised me in a lot of ways, frankly, about the realities around where we get tools like personality testing from, and the fact that there are so many people out there, so many organizations selling these kinds of models, selling these kinds of tools, and they all call it science.
Right.
But when you just consider the fact that you've got this one test has these 4 factors, and this other one's got 16, and something else has, these 5, factors and everything. And you just look at all this, and how can this all be the same science? Could you imagine if we were talking about oxygen, for example? I mean, it leaves you, it really gives you cause to wonder what these are doing. And the other thing that's very surprising is that, one among several things, but when you look back, for example, at the origin of where we got personality testing in the workplace, which goes back to actually just after World War One. It's a very interesting story, actually. But the after the war, during the war, the U.S. Army was trying to develop personality tests, actually to weed out people who might be, you could say, potentially cowards. And the tests were not really completed by the time the war ended. But a lot of American businesses were very interested in the idea that just simple paper and pencil tests could kind of weed out the bad apples, so to speak. And so they started buying these things and using them. But the interesting thing is nobody had actually shown that they really work. But it seems as though no one cared to know whether they worked. They just took it all at face value, and it all kind of fell apart by the before the 1920s were out. One estimate said probably 90% of companies that were using these tests abandoned them because they just weren't producing any results. But it didn't. It kind of gave the vision that, boy, if you could figure out how to, like El Dorado, if you could figure it out, boy, this would just be the greatest thing ever. So you know, it really just proved the market at the end of the day, but it didn't really prove the product. And as late as going into in the early 2000s, two of the most respected journals of personnel psychology, editors from two of these, published papers that showed that the correlation between the five factor, the ocean scores. I think a lot of your listeners may be familiar with that, which is considered kind of one of the holy of holies in a way in that world. The correlation of those scores to uh, job performance was basically, I believe, the last test they did in the early 2000s was like 0.07, and they took a lot of it, generated kind of a firestorm, but they came back and said that they stood by their results and just said, even if you correct for everything that our critics said that we should be correcting, it's still just so low. And they concluded by saying, something to the effect that modern personality measures do not seem to be effective in predicting employee performance. Words to pretty much that effect. And this was quite a while ago. And again, like this is in a personnel psychology journal, and anybody in the human resources field just didn't really seem to care. There didn't seem to be any reaction to this going forward. We can talk about competency modeling, for example. Again, another field where they talk about the science and competency modeling and that. And there's been actually very little research done on kind of scholarly research on, again, do they work? And one count, relatively recently, there were, I believe it was all of 5 studies that were done to try to answer this. And basically, the conclusion was, well, you can't say they don't work, but you can't say they do work.
Right.
And when you consider, the fact that there are so many different versions of what is a competency, what is a competency model supposed to do, and there's so many approaches that the idea that you could actually come up with something we would consider a scientifically reliable conclusion. I mean, it's pretty much impossible. But again,
So let me
no
jump in
one
here.
cares.
So why do you think they've become so popular? Because a lot of leaders, they use them, they swear by them,
Yeah.
organizations. And I've worked with some organizations, of course, where we've had some that were used effectively.
Hmm.
Because of course you have a trained psychologist who is there to be able to interpret and do the coaching, and it's done respectfully. And so it's used as a guide to provide some insight, right, into the
Hmm.
person or the personality. Worked at other organizations where they use them as a tool to weed people completely out, or say that this is who you are all the time. And this tool, this test says that this is who you are. So this is absolutely who you are at all times, because the research cannot fail and the research does
Yeah.
not lie. So why
Yep.
have they become so popular?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is, um, look, I've been a human resources guy for 35 years now, I guess, and I think there's a certain uh, relatively sizable segment of HR people who have used these tools in a sense to get their seat at the table, to gain their legitimacy, and of course, when you consider that the human resources field generally isn't necessarily known as the most, I don't know, serious business partner. It's had this sort of inferiority conflict complex, probably almost since the outset, probably largely deserved on a lot of levels. So it's been that vehicle for towards legitimacy for a certain group of people. The other side of it is, and I have to tell you, Sharalyn, one of the things that shocked me when I decided I wanted to write a book about this, and I was really digging into doing my the research into this. What really surprised me is, we might want to dismiss that use as a product of these HR people that aren't maybe as critical thinkers as the rest of the company, things like that, or they're just kind of gullible to for the slick marketing. But the other thing that's surprising is it seems as though, by and large, what drove most of this impetus, going back again to the 1920s, to the outset, was actually the senior leadership. They're the ones that really believe in this stuff. I found a quote in a book from a woman who was a personnel manager going back to the 1920s, and I think she wrote the book in the 1930s. And she made a comment that she just marveled at the fact that these very, very smart businessmen who were very astute otherwise, they were just suckers for this stuff. And she was looking at these things and, what are you buying into this stuff for? And they swore by it. And I think it's those two things. And I completely get your point. There are, of course, a lot of people who um, you know swear by them, or almost, to an extent, or really rely on these things and everything. And if I could, I'd just like to share one little anecdote with you and your listeners. When I start my book talking about a friend of mine who in 2007, she was living in Chicago and she got married and she was going to move with her husband back here to the Pittsburgh area. And she was working for a large hotel chain, and she was very successful in her role there. She got at least one raise, or a couple of raises. She got a promotion, and she got a promise of a good reference from her boss. And so she comes to Pittsburgh, and the that same hotel chain had an opening for basically her job in the Pittsburgh area. So she goes to I think it was a 3-hour interview. She comes out really confident, really sure she's going to be the choice. A couple days later, she gets an email from the hotel chain. They said they're deciding to consider other candidates, and then they tell her in the email the reason that they rejected her basically is because the personality test they required her to take showed she was not going to be a fit for the company culture. And so you have to look at this, to your point. I mean, a lot of people rely on these things, but HR people, which are supposed to be about listening to people and understanding them and so forth, and making these human connections. This case, it played out as it plays out over the place, that they throw all that out because the equivalent of a paper and pencil test said, well, here's the science, and it's hard not to consider that it's just frankly not very rational. And I have to say, since my book came out, I was really surprised how many people who have reached out to me and shared similar stories. I wish I had known them before, because I would have loved to have included some of that. So these are things that I think really need to be set alongside. Again, to a large extent, people really, they don't want to hear that there's another side to this story, and they don't want to hear the questions that should be raised by these tools.
Thank you for sharing that. I am reminded of, I too have had that experience where I, was not extended an offer for a company because I did not match the culture. Now, the flip side of that, I'm going to assume that they had done some rigorous, I would say, assessments with their population,
Uh-huh.
and then also the culture to be able to match, right, and determine if this person, which would be me, if I was a good fit. But now the flip side of that is I've worked for some organizations that I wish, to be honest, they had done an assessment and weeded me out because I did not fit the culture.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So
I'm sure.
that's
Yeah.
that's the counter to that, is that some people need to be doing it, because when you think about it, though, the harm that can cause if you work at an organization
Yeah.
and you don't fit the culture and you stay too long. You're trying to, um, when I think about bringing somebody in, when an organization is trying to shift the culture and they're trying to weed out the wrong people, but of course they have to do it systematically because you can't push all of them out at one time. But you're bringing in the new people and they're taking those hits, right? And you got to, really kind of encourage them. Hey, take the hit on the chin, keep taking
Yeah.
the hit on, but get back out there, And so they're
Good
coming
point.
back like, I got beat up. Well, yeah, you did, but keep going back, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
until you're able to do that, and it takes time, but we think that, we can just say, we're changing the culture. We're going through a transformation. We brought in McKinsey came to town, all of the
Ah,
things.
you read the book. So did I.
Right.
I'd love to talk about that sometime. Yeah. I know that phrase. It's on my
Exactly.
shelf over there.
And what happens is you have an expectation, right? Because it's the firm, it's the firm.
Yeah.
So when McKinsey comes in, you have all of your hopes on everything is going to change, but the organization doesn't want to do the recommendation.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, because you have the leaders, they're not following through with everything that's recommended until they finally get to the realization that, oh, McKinsey didn't know what they were talking about, or they didn't know what they
Yes.
were doing, right? And so
Yes.
we push them out. We've spent the millions of dollars. And we're right back where we started.
I got to tell you, you said a couple things in there that just bang it right on the head. And in fact, I point out some of this actually again in my book. We the C-suite. I mean, I know this is going to sound heresy to a lot of people, but I mean, I've worked in a lot of different organizations, nationwide, global, the Fortune 500, public and private, blah blah, blah. And multi-site, multi-state kinds of places, multi-shift, and one of the things I've been convinced of over the years is that the idea of a culture, company culture, there's an extent to which it's kind of a myth. You're for better or worse, a company's culture is what people's leaders decide it's going to be, for better or
Absolutely.
worse. And the idea that there's this monolithic, you know, uh, definable set of characteristics that are universally applied, it's not that at all. One of the smartest things I ever did as a vice president of HR was I would tell my staff uh, to let me know when there are exit interviews when somebody's leaving. If I have a chance, I'd like to talk to the person that's leaving, and I talk to people from the VP level people, principals down to field staff, and I really wanted to hear it. Why isn't this place good enough for you? And I thought, by the way, this was a really great company, and I think by and large people did consider it that. But so many of those people, it goes back to kind of, it's almost a trope, but it's very true. People join a company, but they quit a boss, and you can have a lot of
Absolutely.
great things and be you say all this the really ennobling sounding aspirational stuff, and the boss does his best to try to mean it, and you do your best to carry it out. But look, there's a certain percentage that are not going to feel it because they're just working for the wrong kind of people. And in some cases, yeah, we know that guy's a bozo, but you know what? He brings in, $350,000 a year, and we're not taking him out. And that's the way it
Right.
goes.
And
So,
that's the way it
and
goes.
and there you are. So, the idea that you've got these realities, and everybody knows it's true, but the idea that you're going to, again, use the equivalent of a paper and pencil test to inform some completely theoretical, quote unquote reality, which is just at the end of the day a bunch of abstractions. It's really all they are. I mean, when you step back and look at it like that, it's like this is insane. Uh, so
So let me ask you, have you ever taken one and felt like, you know what, this really is me? Because I have taken one that I'm like, this is really interesting. Now, I will say there are a lot that I'm like, this is kind of
yeah,
wild. I don't really know about this, but I have taken one in particular and I thought that this is really interesting.
yeah. I have taken yeah, I have, but I guess and a lot of people have. And this is again like in my book I point this out. It's very interesting. Yes, and most people probably have. But there's a a this has been studied, I guess, by psychologists, and basically what they find is there's a phenomenon where basically we tend to believe information about ourselves that's positive, and we count that more than we would do negative things. So you might like you might say to yourself, you might read a personality test and say, you know you like to think things through before you act. And so you might nod and say, yeah, because I remember when I took my trip to Italy last year, I, yeah, I really planned it out. And maybe you don't want to remember the fact that you spent, $450 on a pair of shoes that you thought were really stylish and they don't fit.
Right.
So everybody, we tend to gravitate to things like that. And you might, and people might want to push back on that. But the fact is that when you look at the business of selling psychology to business, there's a certain aspect where one of the reasons that these tests are popular is because at the end of the day, we gave up on trying. They gave up on trying to basically weed out people to a certain extent because people don't say things about themselves. We've all done interviews, and guess what? People tend not to be completely honest about volunteering negative information. And in these tests, they will shade their answers. It's a very well known phenomenon. It's called faking. That's the technical
Right.
term. So if you think that a certain response is going to harm your ability to get what you want, you're going to color that. And so there's a certain extent to which people in this business have realized it's all but insoluble. So they kind of reorient everything to say, well, we're going to use these for developmental aspects. And again, we can think about the flattery aspect and maybe poo poo some of that. Well, what if the profile that, this came back with you said, you correctly identified you as a tax cheat, you know, or you probably have an alcohol addiction. I mean, are you going to, if you're the decision maker, are you going to say, yeah, let's spread this one around? Probably won't. And they know
Right.
that.
Right.
So 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 there is, you know, uh there's just that kind of that reality. We can look at any of these tests and kind of say that, yeah, that's me, because we have a lot of variety of interactions with things and people, and we act certain ways with some people in some circumstances, and we do it differently
Of
with
course.
others.
Right.
And when the ones that are positive to us, those are the, when someone comes back and says that's who we are, that's what we tend to call to mind.
Interesting you say that. A few years ago, I got certified in Hogan
Oh,
assessment.
did you really? Yeah.
Yes. And I loved the Hogan, but I had a lot of, questions about it as I was even going through and getting my results, interpreted of, is this really me? Or I don't know about this, or this doesn't seem, quite
Yeah.
so. And I don't really, I mean, in the positives or, the areas of opportunity, right? So both.
Right.
But I do like that it talked about your values and your style under pressure. And
Okay.
I can agree and see the style under pressure in my values, but not necessarily so much of the other pieces, right? By having that coach to be able to sit down with and really kind of go through with, which most people don't, it's just
Mhm.
weeding them out, right? So you don't necessarily have someone to sit down and say, let's talk about this in depth and giving them the results. Because I've worked at organizations where, especially when we're looking at executive leaders, is, for even with the Hogan with that, right? We're not sharing the results with them. You're interpreting the results,
Yeah.
identifying what you want to coach around, building your assessment that you want to
Good
present to the
point.
executive leadership team
Yeah.
to kind of discuss. But it takes somebody who's trained and skilled in that. And even with the person, being able to, again, have the insight of what's the bigger picture. I'll never forget, we were going through emotional intelligence,
Uh-huh.
certification. And my manager at the time, chief of human resources, we were kind of in the room, and they had really been harassing me the entire time. Where the trainer was like, "What is going on?" That they are constantly. I was like, "I don't know," but you see, I'm working with a bunch of lunatics here, so I'm sitting here, I'm reading my little book during the breaks. They are harassing me. But when it came time to talk about our results, the room shifted and changed at that point. And you could see people get extremely uncomfortable and began to really challenge, the trainer. Are you suggesting that we don't have this capability here? Are you suggesting? And they began to go really deep and down, a rabbit trail because they did not want to own their before they even saw it. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, it's not a pass fail test. Like, let's just calm down, take a break here. But I'll never forget that the head of human resources did not want me to have to see her results because we were going to have to share ours with somebody else.
Uh-huh.
And she was adamant that I don't want Sharalyn to see my anybody else I'm willing to pair with.
Wow.
And so it was wild. And of course, it's a no judgment zone here. We all have our areas of opportunity, good or bad, whatever this
Sure.
assessment says. But what is it that you are thinking that I'm going to say or do
Yeah.
that you don't want me to see your results? Well, the issue became because she had seen the results ahead of time, right? And my EQ was higher than everybody else's in the room.
Good for you.
And so I never did see how low hers was, but it was such an issue that when we got back, some of the members of the team had called, contacted the board and
Mhm.
shared with the board about how she acted with
Yeah.
that particular, 2
Really?
day training. Yeah. So it was really kind of wild how we can, work in other places, right? That's the only thing I could think about is perhaps she's worked somewhere else
Uh-huh.
and they really hung their hat on these particular assessments and what comes out of that in the next steps.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
so with that,
Yeah.
that fear that I don't want to be exposed, I want to share it with someone who's a junior person on the team.
Yeah,
And
right.
I'm willing to share it with a junior person, but with a senior person, even if this person reports to me, I don't want them to see my areas of opportunity, even if they're the most qualified
Yeah.
in the room to see.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
do think we have to be mindful when we're using these tools of what we're opening our organization and our team up to, right?
Yes.
Because people will begin to feel like they have to live to that level, rise to that level, or
Yes.
imposter syndrome really starts to kick in because you said I'm a D and now I'm working with the C, and you said I'm an I, and I'm like, I don't even know who's a D, I, S, or C, and I don't have the time
Yes.
before the meeting to go in to figure out I'm going to meet with Barry. Oh
Yeah.
wow, I've been on 52 meetings today and I got 22 more. So
Yeah.
let's see. Barry is an I. Okay, Susie on this is in this meeting. She's an S. Oh, by the way, we did colors and this person is a green because
Yeah.
they haven't done it. It just becomes way too much instead of
Yes.
us just deciding, let's just get to know the person. Are you competent in the role that you're here to do?
That is 100% correct. And by the way, I in my book, I take a fair amount of time talking about the DISC assessment,
Okay.
and the and I read the book that it's based on. It was
Mhm.
published in 1928. It's called Emotions of Normal People. It was written by a man named William Marston, who was also the creator of Wonder Woman, by the way.
Oh, wow.
And basically, the book that introduced the world to DISC theory is actually it's basically a pseudoscientific defense of sexual fetishism. It really is, and that's the basis of all that stuff. And if you read, I got to tell you, like I read that book. It's about, I think, about 400 pages. I read it through twice completely, and then several other pieces going back to it. If you go back and read this thing, I think it's impossible not to say, like, basically, this is the biggest bunch of garbage I've ever read in my life. I mean, this is complete nonsense, and the idea that we've got, it's one of the most popular. It's the basis of one of the several of the most popular personality tests used in employment today, and it's just based on, I'm sorry, it's just garbage,
Right.
uh, and yet but we're spending time and money in organizations to say, okay, you're this bucket of this nonsense, and the other person's that bucket of this nonsense. So you've got to figure out this and the other, like you're pointing out. And by the way, aren't I not here to help this business make money? I mean,
Right.
seriously, this is, but
Absolutely.
yeah. So yeah,
Thank you. So, what are the real indicators and the real drivers of performance that we really should be looking at? So, let's talk about
yeah.
how we go forward.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Here's where I find. Um, I think the genesis of that answer is in a Gallup question. Every year they do their annual State of the
Right.
Workforce survey, and in there's one of the questions that they posed in one of the findings they reported in 2024, and which I found completely stunning. They've done similar ones that in previous years have shown similar answers. Excuse me, but in 2024, what they showed was 45% of employees strongly agree with the statement, I know what is expected of me in my job. Now, if you think about it, what that means is, well, I'll put it this way. Even if, so some of your listeners may be, wanting to, you know, um, blowing their minds over me, and everything we're talking about here. But to any of those folks, I would just say, look, even if all of it's true, even if it's all real, if it looks into your mortal soul, or your immortal soul, excuse me, and pegs you, how could any of this possibly make a difference if over 55% of your workers don't even know what the heck you want out of them? And when you think through that, the answer, and I've spent years, mulling this topic. The answer cannot be a better job description. I mean, you're in leadership and so forth. HR. I mean, between us girls in HR, hey, we all know it's not a job description. Um, and it can't be one more super inspiring speech from the boss. It can't be. If we've got the vision statements, we got the mission statements, and that we're missing something. And I really believe the essence of what we're missing is going back to what is this organization here to deliver, not do. When I've reflected on, I've sat in the room, when the decisions are going around about, who gets a raise, who gets a promotion, who needs a performance improvement plan, who needs fired. Because I've been the person to have to deliver a lot of that, especially the bad stuff. But it's the people that deliver. It's you can put. It comes down to, what do you put in somebody's hand? What do you leave on the desk when you go home at night? What do you change out in the wider world? And I think that we've um, we've come to talk about jobs because of a combination between basically lawyers and psychologists, I think. And but we come to think of it in terms of what we do. But if we think about the value an organization exists to create, well, the value is the nouns, if you will. It's what we deliver. It's not the verbs. And I'm not saying what people do doesn't matter. I'm simply saying it 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 can't help people be effective if we're not considering the job in the bigger context of what is this job exist to why does this what does it exist to deliver. And I as a way of kind of framing this issue, I have a chapter in my book called "What Every New Employee Wants to Ask and Almost No Employer Can Answer." And when we in HR, things like orientation, day one, onboarding is really big deal, right? And we all know we got to get that super right. So we've got all these big, complicated checklists, right? We make sure that the on the desk day one is the chocolate bar on the balloon with the welcome sign, and and we show them all the nice. We take them around to all the nice people, and we show them here's where you get your pens, and here's where we all meet for ice cream on Friday, and here's the coffee creamer. But there's one question everybody has that they don't ask because they don't believe they're going to get an answer. And I will tell you, I pose this question to groups, including of executives that I've spoken to, and I ask people, what do you think it is? And all those times I've done it, there's a young guy named Zach who was a frontline supervisor. He's the only guy that ever got the answer. And I tell people, I promise you, when you hear this answer, everybody's going to agree with me. That question is, what do I got to do to get a raise around here? And everybody laughs and they all nod. Yeah, that's the question. And I point out, if you're a salesperson asking day one, what do I got to do to get an answer to get a raise around here? How do you answer them? And everybody, I say, quick, give me an answer. And they say, get more sales. Yeah, that's right. Bring sales. Why is that the only person in the company who gets that answer? And I used to think the reason for years, because I've always reported to the president. I've been involved in lots of questions, discussions about raises. And for years, I thought the reason why is because, they hate getting tied down about raises. They don't want to get boxed in, if you will, too early. They don't know how the year's going to go. Don't know if they're really going to like this person at the end of the year. So they don't really want to make those commitments. But I've really come to be convinced that there's a deeper reason for that. And it's because they really don't know.
Absolutely.
They know what a person does, but that's all they know. They really don't know, how does this person really, or this job, how does this really connect to the value we're here to create? And that's why they can't answer that. And when we talk about, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, I agree with that, but I think they don't know. And part of it is we have the values that hang on the wall. And what I found is that it really doesn't matter how hard you work and what you deliver, and you can go over and beyond doing your role, right? You can do it fantastically. But
Yeah.
reality is that we have this little thing over here that we don't really like to talk about, which is called office politics. And then we got this other
Yes.
thing called your personality. And you can be delivering, but I just don't like you. Or you can
Yeah.
deliver and knock it out the ballpark. But reality is I'm threatened or intimidated by you.
Very true.
Or it could be this other thing is that, hey, they don't really like me, but I like you and I don't know how to sell you.
That's a great point.
So I don't
Yeah.
have any influence when it comes to
Yeah.
having these particular decisions. And we have this, don't even get me started, these calibration systems that are so off. I think those are what should be banned because
Yeah.
you don't really, you're bumping people up against, and, you have well, all of these are all principles, but they don't do the same thing and they don't deliver the same
Yeah.
way, and they don't have the same caliber of leadership. So
Yes.
this person who is holding me accountable and is a great leader, when they say I'm a great leader or I'm doing excellent, I really believe that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then you have, Barry over here who is, hitting the golf balls all day and at the coffee machine and doing whatever the heck he wants to do.
Yeah.
But because his manager likes him,
Yeah.
we're calibrated, the same.
Yes.
And he's rated higher than me. And we see that he's on the fast track to the C suite. While I'm sitting here, and I'm going to say this, and so hopefully no one gets offended, but it's just my personality and it's my podcast. And so I'm here like
So
the Hebrew,
go for it. Yeah.
right? Like I'm over here, the Hebrew slave, and, and you're working me like a dog. And actually believe that hard work
Yeah.
and going over and beyond and working at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning is going to get me
Yeah.
the raise or the promotion. It just doesn't work like that if we were really telling the truth and being honest about the system. It just,
Yes.
I've worked with some calibrations and, sat in on them, and it has been absolutely hilarious. One lady, they were like talking about things this lady did like 15 years ago. And it's like, seriously, 15 years ago? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
she's still here. Why are we talking about she's changed though throughout the 15 years,
Of course.
but you're still stuck 15 years in the past without having the courage to say you need to go or whatever we need to do because I don't like you from you embarrassing me 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we're managing her like crazy because you want to
Yes.
manage her out and you've been managing her out for 15 years, which has not happened because she still delivers.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
And so then it becomes we can't get rid of her because she calls the compliance hotline on everybody near calibration time.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah.
Now,
That's
of
a
course,
great point.
that's just an extreme example.
Yeah.
But reality is if we look at what truly works, and going back to your point, it's knowing how do we get promoted and how do we give raises and what are we here to do and what's expected of you truly.
Yeah.
And having those conversations on a regular basis with feedback that is very specific and being honest that, hey, this is how it works. You
Yes.
need visibility. You need an advocate, you need a supporter, and this is not going to happen because you work in these particular, jobs that don't necessarily give you that. And I've not really worked on cross-functional
Yeah.
relationships so you can be able to do some other things. And then
Right.
also we need to invest in you and we don't have money. So go take this Skillsoft class online and sit down and leave me alone. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great point. It's a great point. But along those lines, and
Yes.
you're bringing up so many issues that are, none of us has a real definitive answer.
Right. Of course.
I mean,
Exactly.
the board's got to come to its senses and do
Right.
its thing. I mean, fix those. But what we can do is think about this in terms of how do we help people understand the way I like to think about it. I mean, what I think in most organizations, what should be the challenge of leadership is how do we help people help the business succeed?
Right.
And when we've got, and again, like when 55% of the workforce, excuse me, really doesn't know what they want. I mean, that's got to be step one. And I think that when we look at, you take like the issue of feedback, like instead of, again, like so instead of a job description, start making that the central document, if you will. I came up with something I call it success maps, and instead of, and it's something where you look at what are the things that this person has to produce, what do they got to leave on the desk, those kinds of things, and then you can kind of grade those in terms of, okay, this is what fully successful looks like. These are the levels of contribution that would be above and beyond. And if you want to show it like the top 2% in on this particular deliverable, you want to really get somebody's attention, you give us it up here. And then kind of the other end of the spectrum, if you're producing at this level, if you don't fix this, your job could be in jeopardy. And and when you're able to do that, you're able to, I think, really start having meaningful discussions with employees. So often, like when we look at like performance appraisals, and you look at things like uh, where we're talking about things like initiative and commitment to quality and so forth. And this isn't a performance appraisal. This is a psychological profile. You know, and so your conversation with your boss is, well, I don't think you're showing initiative because of this or that. Well, I think I'm doing that. It's like, look, I can't read your mind. I have no idea what's in there. And in
Mhm.
the grand scheme of things, does our customer care whether, you're displaying the right? No, they don't.
Right.
They're giving us money. Are we giving them what they expect? And I think when you
Mhm.
can start talking to people on those kinds of levels, now you don't have to have the psychologist. You don't have to look into somebody's soul. We can look at, what's getting in your way to deliver this, and how do I help you clear that out? Provide what you need to help you become successful. And so, I just think that's when you mentioned, I call the process overall value-centric leadership, and that's what it is. It's not values because we got enough of those, but it's looking at the value that that
Love
that the
that.
organization exists to create. How do we really connect people to that? So
Wow. Thank you. So let me ask you, you kind of answered the question, but I do want to ask you, Is there a single most important consideration to implementing value-centric leadership?
Yes. Above all, the single biggest issue, uh, and this is something some people again may not want to hear, but here's Barry's little observation about CEOs, having worked for the CEO all my life. Given a choice between thinking hard and spending money, most senior guys would rather spend money. And to get to what is the value, I started off. This whole process starts with coming up with sitting down with the boss, and we come up with the answer to two simple questions. Number one, what are the key drivers of value in your organization? The nouns, not verbs. It's not aspiration, but nouns, noun phrases. And what are the results the organization produces by which each one of these drivers of value are being achieved? That that's hard. They're two little questions, but it's really hard to answer. I've clients I'm working with the CEO on this, and it is weeks. It's like once a week. The quickest we ever got one done took a grand total of probably 14 hours. And it's listening, taking notes, and me sitting and thinking, like transcribing things and coming up with drafts and beating it up from there. It's hard. And most of these people just are not predisposed to just shutting the door, putting the phone down and doing really hard thinking. Now I gotta say, without exception, once we've gotten past, there's a tipping point, if you will, where they really start to see this is what they value, why they started the business, took the second mortgage out, don't see their kids for a while, whatever. What they want for their employees and communities, as they start to see it taking shape, it really excites them. You start seeing what the other side of the mountain, that this actually is something that's meaningful to them and helps them create the business that wanted them to take the top job and make the sacrifices along the way for it. And it's so exciting, but getting there is hard. And it's just not something I don't know of another business exercise that involves something like this. And by the way, the end result, which is so exciting, it's like a 300, usually never more than 300 pages. There's no MBA speak. You could stick it on a wall, and it's understood by your C-suite people and your 21-year-old machine operator off the floor. Everybody can get it. And it's, as we point out to people, everything you think about, everything you spend money on, everything you talk about either lives in this document or it's a waste. And it excites people when they start seeing it. Just gotta get them there.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I know you have your book that's out. I want to invite people to get value-centric leadership. This conversation really challenges us to
Thank you.
think differently about leadership and how we measure what matters. And you've given us some clear tools for us to
Thank
be
you.
able to move forward. And especially if applied psychology is not the answer. And it's not
Yes.
the answer. We know
If
that.
if I could
So
just
value.
clarify one little thing, if I could. The
Mhm.
title of the book is actually, it's called "It's All in Your Head." And the
It's all in your
subtitle
head.
is
So I love
"Why
it.
Psychology Doesn't Help Your Employees Deliver Value and What Can." So that's the
Perfect.
name of the
Thank you.
book. So
Thank you for
thank you.
that. So it might just be the way forward. Thank you for pushing the boundaries of how we think about leadership and culture. So for those listening, grab a copy of the book. I will have the correct copy with a link for you. So you don't mess
Thank
it
you.
up like I just did.
Awesome. Okay.
So
Ah,
that you can connect with Barry. I own my stuff, so you can connect with Barry
awesome.
online. And as always, don't just lead like a game changer.
Great. Great.
You don't lead like everyone else, so your resources shouldn't look like everyone else's. I created the Game Changer Leadership Collection for high impact leaders like you, visionaries, change agents, decision makers who lead with intention and influence. This free high impact resource pulls from my leadership arsenal and delivers immediate actionable insights you can use right now to elevate your influence, lead with conviction, and drive lasting transformation. It's not just a toolkit, it's your first step toward leading at the level you were born for. Let me show you what's inside. The Leadership Edge Sampler. It's a preview of my 10 daily power skills to sharpen your influence and impact. The Influence Language Mini Guide. Essential phrases to increase your authority and build trust in every room you walk into. The leadership blind spot snapshot, because the greatest risk are the ones we don't see. The power of one visual aid, a reminder that even one decision, one tone, or one conversation can shift a team or stall a movement. The executive briefing checklist, a go to tool for high stakes communication that drives clarity and alignment. The 5-minute accountability brief, a no fluff framework to build a culture of ownership fast. And we have the Game Changer Ascension Model Overview, my proprietary leadership growth map to help you scale your influence with intention. These are the very same tools I use with executives, culture shapers, and elite teams, leaders who know what's at stake and aren't here to play small. Because when you're called to shift systems, influence nations, and build legacies, you can't afford to lead on autopilot. This is where your next level begins. Download the Game Changer Leadership Collection today. It's free, it's strategic, and it's built for leaders who are born to shift the game. I'm Dr. Sharalyn Payne, and this is your Leadership Edge. Thank you for joining me on the Game Changer with Dr. Sharalyn, where we don't follow trends, we set them, and we don't just lead teams, we shift legacies. If today's message challenged, stretched, or inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, tag it, lead through it, because real leaders don't just consume wisdom, they multiply it. Want to go deeper? Subscribe to the Ultra Influential newsletter for exclusive tools, behind-the-scenes strategy, and weekly mindset shifts for the leader ready to move nations, markets, and minds. Visit www.smpistrategies.com or send a note to leadership@smpistrategies.com. And if you're ready for next level coaching or consulting that positions you as the right leader at the right time in the right place, let's talk. This is what we do, and we do it with precision, power, and purpose. Remember, change isn't just something you lead, it's something you become. Stay bold, stay brilliant, stay a game changer.